Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the second installment of the Industry Futures discussion series. Today, we're having a digital roundtable that will examine the role of sustainable finance in advancing Canada's future economy. The discussion today and the whole series is presented by the Electronic Recycling Association, or ERA, which is a not-for-profit founded in 2004 that has the vision of negating the world's e-waste problem, cultivating environmental sustainability, and giving promise to socioeconomic development. My name is Tim Penketh. I'm the founder and CEO of TheFutureEconomy.ca. We're a Canadian multimedia platform that produces interviews and panels featuring leaders from industry, government, academia, all to define a strong vision for Canada's future economy and what we need to do now to get there. And we're very proud to be partnered with the ERA to present this panel. Before we start, do go to futures.era.ca to stay informed on the Industry Futures series, and also go to TheFutureEconomy.ca to check out what we have to offer. Today's discussion is going to be a great one. We'll be chatting with 4 Canadian leaders about our country's role in shaping a more resilient, a more accessible, more sustainable global economy. And we'll be doing that through the lens of how it can be approached through sustainable finance, impact investing, and ESG considerations. So we'll be covering a bunch of topics like standardization, the role of boards, key issues of talent, and more. As you can see, we have 4 guests with us today. Joining me is Sarah Chapman. She's the Chief Sustainability Officer at Manulife. We also have Chiron, who's the Chief Strategy Officer at Payments Canada. We have Janice Noronha, who's a Partner of Sustainability and Climate Change at PwC Canada. And we have Priti Shokeen, who is the Head of ESG Research and Engagement for TD Asset Management. Thank you all for joining us today. I'm really looking forward to the discussion and your insights. And if you're all up for it, let's get started. So the first topic we'll be speaking about success and standardization. So the question is, how important is sustainable finance for the future of Canada's economy? And how will we measure its success against the country's overall socioeconomic performance? Who'd like to go first?
I can go first, Tim. So, I think, it's extremely important, especially given that we are a resource economy still. A lot of jobs and financial performance of the country is dependent on natural resources. But I think, there are certain steps that are being taken. The Government of Canada has established the Sustainable Finance Action Council in 2021. To bring together, public and private sector financial expertise to support the growth and well-functioning of our financial markets. So I think, financial leaders will definitely provide their input on the foundational infrastructure and, what is a reliable, sustainable financial market. And, that's really to boost investor confidence and boost economic growth. So I think mobilizing capital towards sustainable finance is critical, is going to be a critical part of Canada's work to also meet the Paris Agreement, right? So we have 2030 targets to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. And that's going to ensure, hopefully, that Canada continues to have a more prosperous economy going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just add to that, Priti's comment. I think that I echo all of what she has mentioned, and I'd like to just bring a little bit more color. When we're thinking about how important sustainable finance will be for Canada, really recognizing the real economy, the resource-intensive companies that we have in Canada, and starting to think a little bit about very much the 2030 agenda, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, in Canada's national strategy, which was released last year, and including in the budget, we have very clear expectations to support not only economic growth, but social impact in the country, the environmental objectives of Canada as well. And we've also started to see the government of Canada through the finance department start to think about, what does a livelihood and quality of life actually need to look like over and above GDP and economic growth, but really those sort of social economic impact areas. So I would suggest as well that this is going to be, a game changer for Canada. We're moving and pivoting in the next, 10 years as we transition. And it's really going to be designed for a smooth transition that brings all sectors along with us as well.
Yeah, and if I can just add as well, it's really good. I was saying, like, it's good for the economy, where we're really talking about both. We know that sustainable finance bring higher returns. We have a lot of evidence in other countries showing this. So it's really making the society more equitable and more inclusive. We'll definitely see the benefits in the long term for the economy. And really see higher returns for investors, or for even opportunities overall for new business that we just don't know about.
Sarah, do you have anything to add?
No, I think we've well covered this one.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you so much for your comments. Obviously, it's great to be speaking about ESG and sustainable finance. But one of the key issues here is standardization. Are we actually speaking about the same thing? So where do you think Canada is in terms of ESG standardization and, of course, disclosure in terms of what companies are doing in that respect? And what kind of importance do you attach to this in terms of how it's crucial or not to the development of the space? And where does Canada rank right now in that respect?
So Tim, I'll maybe start this. For me, as we think about standardization and certainly disclosure methodologies, to me this is a global issue, and I think Canada is well placed to be at the table, particularly with the development of the IFRS Foundation establishing the ISSB, the International Sustainability Standards Board, of which Frankfurt being a main office, but the Montreal office being a secondary office. Canada will have an important role to play there, and a number of financial services leaders met with the ISSB a couple of weeks ago, as they were opening up that Montreal office, to start that discussion. That to me will, I think is an important moment for us in the ESG world from an international standardization perspective. We are also starting to see convergence around other guidelines like the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, TCFD. So we're starting to see convergence, again, internationally, importantly, especially for a company like Manulife being so global. We need that standardization, frankly, to be happening at an international level.
Yeah, and Tim, I completely echo whatever Sarah just mentioned. We are investors in, essentially the global opportunity, but heavily exposed to the Canadian companies as well. So, standardization at the global level is extremely important for investors so that we're all speaking the same language. There's not a lot of miscommunication around ESG strategies and also ESG labeled funds, for example. So EU came out with their taxonomy, and it sort of like continues to evolve. Just recently we heard about nuclear and natural gas sort of being included as transition fuels, and it just shows how complex the challenges for us to reach some of our climate goals. Because essentially, nuclear used to be something that would be excluded for traditional ethical funds or social responsible investments. So I think, the space continues to evolve, and I think, it has to be grounded in scientific knowledge and facts. There's a lot of taxonomy challenges. So Canada is also developing our own taxonomy, and it's been delayed quite significantly because ultimately, it is a complex issue, and you cannot get consensus on, what could potentially be included versus what is going to be not labeled green. So I think the challenges remain, but I completely agree with Sarah that, some sort of a global consensus is required because this is a global challenge.
Yeah, and if I can add as well, it's also beyond climate, right? Like when we talk about ESG, there's all other aspects that need to take into consideration. So that really also add to the mix of the complexity and the standardization and a lot of things, and not everybody starts at the same level. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, so from the financial institutions, OBSFI is going to have some guidelines for 2024 for financial institutions that to be able to report on. So that can also, be extended to other industries and other, overall for the Canadian economy. But I'd like to add on the standardization as well. It's also, and I know we're going to talk a little bit later about talent, but awareness and knowledge. I think there is also something to in education, on what it is, what they're after, and how can we really work around that space that needs to be taken into considerations, because even the education is not standardized. So if we want to have this to be successful in Canada, and it is important for the economy, a little bit of standardization also in education, it will be important, so that we speak the same language and we have the right people who can look at this. And I speak on experience because I'm really becoming passionate about that topic, and I do follow a lot of trainings, and I have different topics or different courses. So that is something I think we need to think about, as well as having the right reporting guidelines.
Yeah, and maybe just to add, when we start to think about where Canada is, Canada has been playing a formidable role on the international stage during COP26. Our government, as you know, in the recent budget, has put in place climate-related reporting expectations, and that's really going to touch our regulated banks, the insurance companies, and even the pension funds with regards to ESG. And I think this is going to have a ripple effect in the economy. It's going to enable companies to start to be thinking a little bit more deliberately on those disclosures, making sure it's credible, there's the right frameworks in place to ensure accountability within the organizations. I do think that, as mentioned already by many of my peers here today, is that while this is an international sort of disclosure expectation, Canada has enabled the convergence, right, by asking for TCFD disclosure, a recognition that having climate, but also ESG framed under governance, strategy, risk management, performance, and metrics is going to be incredibly important, especially with the work of the ISSB and what they're trying to do for consistent disclosures going forward. So I think in terms of just globally, I think we're very well positioned, and we need to continue to play an important role in advancing the conversation, driving it into the economy and into the expectations around even finance, and then even coming up with metrics and performance indicators to determine for Canada, how are we actually doing and how are we moving the agenda forward as it relates to our national strategy and policy objectives.
Well, I think that feeds in very well to the next topic, which is the role of boards. Of course, if we're collecting data and we have metrics and KPIs, that's exactly what has to feed into the boardroom, because, as you all said, this is it's already an important issue, but it's only growing in importance, and companies' sustainability and risk profiles are now subject to even greater scrutiny from investors, from advisors, from regulatory bodies as well. So, excuse me, to provide the required oversight and support, obviously those boards need the right ESG information reported to them. So I have a question here that's twofold, which is, what would you define as the right information? And how does a company's board need to evolve to adequately oversee and support the delivery of its ESG strategy based on that information? Any thoughts on that?
I can start. So In terms of, we talked about it, about the standardization requirements, so having the right information, we covered that. But I think it will be important also to identify what matters. And we're not going around, everything and anything, but really what is the key important things that are for the organization that the board is having oversight on, and really integrate it into their decision process. And compensation plans, not having something on the side of the desk. And with regards to board oversight, I think first we'll be looking at the board composition, and we'll be make sure that we reflect, the diversity of inclusions, and as I said, it's not only about climate. There is all the other components, because if we have a diversified board, then we'll be the first step, at least, in getting into talking about implementing ESG within the company. But the other thing also, there are special companies that have special ESG committees, or they have advisors that come and help them to guide the board through, what to do with ESG journey. And that really helped them understand the whole ecosystem that will be around the company, to clearly identify what matters and what impact they will have on the society and the environment. But the thing as well that is important will be to include the ESG within the overall strategy of the organization. It's not something on the side. It's not, an additional column on whatever you are reporting to, but it has to be really including the strategy we are trying to do, from the purpose of the organization to, I don't know, the annual balance scorecard if you have one, but also in the executive compensations, your vision, your mission, etc. So having everything integrated and started with the board composition, the board expertise, that will make something more successful for the organization overall.
I mean, I think what we're seeing in terms of increasing expectations, particularly from rating agencies and others, is an increasing level of competence in some of these quite technical areas of board members. As this space is evolving, climate change, biodiversity, and for me, I think keeping the board up to date, having a regular cadence of those updates is really important. But frankly, it's the board's role to be asking the right questions, and they need to be empowered with the information to be able to ask the right questions. But this space is evolving very, very quickly, and I think we need to be realistic about what the board can absorb, just like any other topic across the organization. So for me, it comes down to having the right governance structure in place such that ESG is, a regular topic and not a one-off, and that it's baked into, the governance of the organization, but that the board is really asking the right questions of management.
Yeah, and if I may add, more from an investment standpoint, the points that Cyrielle mentioned, extremely important. It has to be integrated within the business strategy. It's not something on the side. At the same time, what we're seeing is that, executive compensation is being tied to some of the E&S metrics. And I believe it is the board's job, as Sarah mentioned, to ask the key questions, right? So if you are including certain metrics which are related to ESG in executives' compensation plans, are they the right metrics? Are they actually ambitious enough, or are they, a tick the box exercise that, yes, we've included it in compensation plans. At the same time, those were really low-hanging fruits, which were already part of the, progress plan, or have already been achieved. So I think being ambitious enough in some of those targets is also the role of the board to have a balanced view of, okay, we're including these aspects, but at the same time, are they actually moving the needle for the company to achieve their strategic objectives?
Yeah. I guess I'll just add that just going back to materiality, sometimes materiality exercises can get lost in the details and become quite academic. And I think it's going to become incredibly important going forward for the board to really understand value creation. And when we talk about value creation, we talk about materiality. There's this concept that's evolving and continuing to be discussed through the ISSB and through other organizations with regards to double materiality, the impact that ESG factors can have on the value of a company, the enterprise value, and really understanding what drives the value creation in that regard, but also the impact that ESG can have from a risk perspective, from a reputational capital, from markets, technology, innovation that's happening, and how that actually triggers value creation through different types of stakeholders, including the planet. And really having that formidable conversation at the board level will become paramount because they need to have access to the right information. So it's not just these are important because our stakeholders told us they are. That we need to move to a discussion about, where are we able to generate more revenue? Where will we be able to become more efficient as a business? And where can we manage our impact and reputational capital and regulatory obligations, et cetera? And then using that information, again, to Priti's point, to drive executive compensation and drive the way that you want to really enable the success of the management teams in the organization.
Well, we have two very large investors here. We have Sarah from Manulife and Priti from TD Asset Management. But obviously, this question is open to everyone. I'm wondering, when you're looking at the landscape of potential companies to allocate capital to, obviously globally, but specifically in Canada, and you're looking at those companies' boards and their structure and the skills and talent that is on them, is there anything that you're looking at specifically that you want to see there? And conversely, are there any red flags that, hey, this is missing or we don't like that? I'm just curious about what approach you take from that perspective.
Sorry, do you want to go first?
Sure. So, I mean, so there's a couple of things I would say. One, when we think about ESG integration, so integrating, ESG principles in the way that we evaluate companies, that is something we are doing across, the entire portfolio, both on the asset management and on the asset ownership side of things. We are also, a lot of people are defaulting to, key rating agencies like CDP, Sustainalytics, and other indices, and at Manulife Investment Management, we're looking at sort of the granularity of and trying to use, things like natural language processing, looking at other aspects of not just, publicly disclosed documents like an ESG report, but things like even news releases in terms of, if you think about, who's being quoted from a gender diversity perspective as a leading indicator of, a culture of diversity, as one sort of theoretical example. There's, I think that there is double clicks and triple clicks that organizations are doing now to fully understand where companies are at on their ESG journey.
Yeah, and all, everything Sarah mentioned, that's, I wouldn't repeat that, but at the same time, I just want to add that when we're engaging with companies, we're meeting our portfolio companies on a regular basis on ESG and their progress on specific topics, for example, climate, D&I, and, what are their targets, looking at the information like hard facts. And, are they disclosing metrics or not? And in case, they're not, we're definitely encouraging disclosure and more transparency from our portfolio companies on these particular topics. We could go in depth on any of those, but I think typically we look for, even softer cues in our engagement meetings that, who's doing the talking in those meetings. Is it primarily investor relations? Is it their chief sustainability officer, or is it actually, head of strategy or chair of the board who's engaging on those issues, and how well versed they are on those issues? So I think, that those aspects of skills and the skill matrix at the board to be able to comprehend some of these very fast evolving complex issues as they pertain to their own business is extremely critical for us. At the end of the day, we're managing money on behalf of our clients, and we have a fiduciary responsibility. So it really matters to us how, top of the game the companies and their boards are on these specific issues.
And I will just add, I think we don't talk enough about the power of the engagement that Priti is talking about. It is extremely powerful in terms of those conversations led by investors with organizations. Obviously, at Manulife, I sort of have perspective of both sides, and the engagement approach is an incredible way to drive action and frankly test where companies really are at on their ESG journey beyond an ESG report. So I think that's going to remain a really important critical aspect of the way that we transition, particularly in the context of climate change, but also on certain areas like diversity, equity, and inclusion, again, beyond the metrics. At the same time, I have seen the power, across, for many years in different roles, the power of transparency. And when an organization, gets to a place where they're more transparent about not only their progress against a target, but frankly, even just disclosing information that they maybe hadn't in the past, how that drives, attention and action within an organization. And so, there's an important element of just driving increased transparency on this. But again, I just want to I want to echo Priti and just, solidify the importance of engagement by investors in this space.
Yeah, and if I can just say, not from an investment point of view, but maybe from like a strategy, like even if I don't know what are the reporter standardization, I just want to aspire to be better, just better to the next stage, and trying to have this mentality first, I think will give you a long way. Try to say, where are we at and how can we just be better? And I think that would be the first step.
Yeah, and just maybe not from the investor side as well, but from the company side, I think one of the aspects that has been very useful and valuable from the investors is really understanding how the taxonomies are being used. So when they do their disclosure, we're starting to see more and more companies wanting to get away from fluffy reports to more impactful reports that get decision useful for investors. What are those KPIs? What percentage and thresholds are being applied? And how can companies actually use investors, financial institutions to really enable and accelerate their progress as well? So I think that's a definite preoccupation of many companies. And I would really full-heartedly agree that we wouldn't be here today if we had not had the investors moving this pendulum for the last 3 to 5 years. It's been absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, and Tim, if I may just also add, from an investment standpoint, transparency is key for us, right? So obviously not everything will go into an ESG report, but at the same time, through these discussions, there's a lot that we get to know about the companies and a lot of feedback we may also be able to provide. So, one of the key things that has come out recently in our engagement meetings, and I'd like to share that more broadly, is that when we talk about capital allocation towards certain, I would say climate change, because that's been predominantly the topic of conversation, and capital allocation is a huge, aspect of how we find sustainable solutions. Increasingly companies are talking about allocation and the dollar figure, but they're not really reporting on, the financial performance of those businesses explicitly in their financial statements. So, things to consider. How does this information get integrated within the mainstream traditional financial information you're providing to investors? I think that's going to be critically important for us going forward.
Excellent. We're going to jump into talent. I just want to ask, Sarah, were you able to bump 15 minutes or are we still stopping on the hour?
I am good till 12:15.
Awesome. Excellent. Empty your hearts, everyone. We've got time. Okay. Well, Excellent. Thank you very much. Let's shift gears and speak about talent. I know that Cyrielle is very passionate about this topic, but I'm sure the other three of you are as well, because the war for talent is global, it's fiercer than ever, and it extends across every segment of a company's org chart, top to bottom, left to right. So with this focus on sustainable finance, ESG-related issues, how do you think Canadian businesses can attract, develop, retain the leadership talent and the skills that they need to drive their ESG and sustainability strategies, but also ensure successful outcomes within that work? Any thoughts on the talent piece?
So I think I'll start, right? Since you said I was passionate about it.
Don't hold back. Go ahead.
But really, I would say, well, we know it's very important for talent and especially for the young generation. And I think I will start with a purpose. Whatever the purpose is as an organization, you need to find your purpose, and that will give you some focus as well. We talked about it's very big, so that might, focus on what matters. So I would say have a purpose. But we know really talent is hard for a lot of other, criteria. But we know the young generation is really having ESG, or even if they don't call it ESG, they have, ethics, let's say, at heart. We know they're more likely to not purchase certain brands if they don't have, if they don't follow the values of what means for them. And I was just saying, because I also, as a good strategist and researchers, I have some stats, but from other countries. And in the UK in 2022, they were saying that young workers, among half of them, were okay to sacrifice the salary if, they were not having, if they were going for the company that have to share the same values, right? And they were also able to quit if the companies were not acting on the values that they were looking for. So it's already hard to get talent if on top of that, the people, have expectations, and if the employers are ignoring it, they are going to lose more and more talent. But also, what is important is it is definitely a competitive advantage. It's not only having an ESG strategy, but what we talked about, transparency, and be able to communicate about it in a clear and simple way and make it very easy access for your staff, but also for people you are attracting, will be very important in a competitive advantage for you, because people are looking at this information on your website before going into, even not for an interview, but applying for a role. So that would be very, very important. And also being clear on the action you're taking and the measures that you're having so that you can prove that you're going something. We're not talking about a nice to have now, we're talking about a must have. And I think I was reading in the news saying the Gen Z is making the revolution of ESG or something like that. It's actually happening because they are the one that are really pushing and provoking things. Now, the other thing that I want to talk about talent, and actually on the ESG workforce that we talked about, having people who are specialized in ESG. So it's good to have it and want to do something about it, but there's also a skill shortage on ESG talent itself, because there is no much, I would talk, education about it. So making sure that we have the right measure that we talked about, but also the right training, and also maybe having modules in students, I don't know, business schools or whoever, to be able to start having this in a mindset of any new talent that we are going to recruit will help in the long run for organizations to actually get better at what they are doing now. So you can see on how it's 360 here, and it's not only fixing patches left and right and say that, yes, I'm ethical, or have the right values, or have the right purpose, but it's really embed everything together from the students up to the board and really have it in the DNA of the organization from whenever you're communicating, however you're articulating certain things, and really pick and choose of what matter for you, and I'm not going to say stick to it, but show that in a clear way that you're doing something about it. It's not going to be the only thing that is going to attract and retain talent, but it's going to be very important for the new generation.
I will add, and perhaps add, maybe a provocative point of view, maybe not. When we think about ESG skill sets and ESG, talent. Yes, within an organization, there's going to be, a global sustainability team or a centralized, D&I team. However, my prediction is, and certainly the way that Manulife is approaching this, is that it is actually embedded in people's roles without it being, you're an ESG person and you're going to look after these 7 things. It's okay. You sit in risk and you're going to look at things from a climate risk perspective, or you sit in finance and you're trying to figure out the intersection here, or you sit even within operations and thinking about ESG. So it's really about the skill sets that people have, in their traditional roles, and adding an ESG lens across the entire organization for all roles, and embedding that responsibility as a lens across all, is, I think, the way we're going to scale, and embed, strategically, what we're trying to do, and certainly the actions and the targets that we have in this space.
Yeah, 100% I agree with that. And, I just to add to that, having very strong tone from the top is going to be incredibly important. This isn't a side of the desk issue. And while it's getting integrated, having the executive and named executive officer who reports directly into the CEO's office, who sits and goes to the board meetings on a regular basis. And I think we can't represent the importance of trust. Companies, as we start to evolve and move into this sort of sustainable businesses and sustainable models, we need to start to shift towards authentic leadership, conscious leadership, the ability to do what we say we're going to do, to make the hard choices, to be transparent on how choices are being made, so that the next generation, the teams that have to deliver on these objectives, recognize the pros, the cons, what are we trying to do as a business, and really help them to and enable them to push the organization forward, even when we are stretched with economic objectives and short-term returns, and sort of really being able to have much more candid conversations about what is ESG, what's it going to take, and how are we as a business going to position ourselves and therefore enable the future talent to do what they have to do.
Yeah. And Tim, not to repeat everything that, my fellow colleagues have said here, but one thing, the pandemic has really thrown a wrench into human capital management, right? It's really shown a very different way of working, living, for all of us, right? So, it is going to be a challenge for companies to define that culture and maintain it going forward, because at the same time, there's a trade-off between maintaining that culture while letting people work from home, which is seemingly the preference right now for a lot of us. So I think being able to pull all those threads and defining the purpose of the corporation, they're all going to be key to this. But we really are living in a redefined work environment. So I think all of us are, potentially, I'm just speaking for all of us, but we're definitely struggling in terms of maintaining that fine line between preserving a company's culture while having those work-life considerations being redefined and having flex, structures of work. So I don't know if others have thoughts on that, but I think we're really living in a different world now.
Do others have thoughts on it?
No, I think you hit it right on. I think in a virtual environment, it's challenging on many fronts. How we show up, how we come together and work in teams, the way in which we solve for society and solve the solutions of the future. I think we're going to possibly be moving into more hybrid models, hopefully. But I think in the interim, even the expectations being set out by brands and the trust and trying to make sure that people can feel the experience of what it's going to take to be sustainable is going to become more and more important. So I would absolutely echo what you're saying. I do think at the same time, COVID has accelerated the younger generation, the innovation that's happening for companies to rethink. We've seen more and more businesses really starting to have conversations, very dedicated conversations about purpose and what that actually means and how we're going to touch our talent, our way we think about products and services, our innovation, etc. So in a post-COVID world, I think we're going to see more of it. And again, but challenging, to your comment with regards to how we collaborate and how we work together.
Yeah, me, if I can just add, I'm excited about it. So I see the other things, right? I'm excited on saying what I don't know that's going to happen, what is going to come up out of it. So maybe, it's my innovation mind that is in there. And I'm thinking I can connect with people that maybe would have not been able to hire before, or at least connect because we have this virtual world. So yes, it is not easy, but I'm just trying to see, I'm sure there's a lot of new things that are going to come. And I think we just scratched the surface. We will have to adapt and readapt, but I'm really looking forward to what this is going to come up with and how we will be able to identify and connect with other people or other aspects of life that we just didn't think about before.
Well, it's been mentioned that one of the key things that has to change is that the ESG consideration and the lens that we take for each of our individual roles within a company has to spread throughout the whole team from top to bottom. Obviously, that pertains to a company's culture, how the company, I was going to say forces, but encourages its team to look at things and to shape their own roles. Obviously, the four of you deal with a lot of companies within Canada. If you had to look at those that maybe are succeeding the most in terms of adapting their company culture to this new world of having to live and work within an ESG framework, what would you highlight as best practices, or what did you find most interesting in terms of what's being done in Canada now to shift companies' cultures towards this new reality?
I can kick it off, and I'm sure others will have lots of thoughts on this. I think, some of the successful companies we're seeing, they're really embedding it at the top, and then it's percolating, down to the bottom of the organizations. Many of them are, obviously adopting a little bit more of a flatter hierarchy as well within the organizations. But I think, if you embed it within strategic objectives or, some sort of targets at the top, it really becomes front and center, and everybody's taking notice. Otherwise, we sort of like go back to the model of hey, here's an ESG expert, and they're going to do everything as it relates to the organization as well as all the other functions. So I think going back to Sarah's point, to embed it, across the board and to really make it mainstream within business strategy, it has to come from the top.
And I would say for me, it just even start. So I can't speak for other organizations, but to just start having this conversation, start to have a look at what you've done already, because there's sometimes a lot of actions that has been done. You just didn't know it wasn't clarified at ESG, and just think about it and try to, just reach to be better at what you wanted to do before. And I think really going back again, we're saying just culture, DNA, just to say we're going to start doing this, and this is step one. That would be just start.
The only thing I would add to what's been discussed is often we look at ESG from a risk mitigation lens, and I think Janice, you were touching on it earlier, and I think in addition to that, shifting and really seeing the value creation that comes from this. And I don't just mean, reputationally, in some ways, cost savings, that's not necessarily always the lens. Certainly from a shared value lens, be it that we can actually create economic value and value for our business by addressing social and environmental issues. And I think once you start to see the business opportunity in engaging and addressing some of these issues in innovative ways, that's when we're going to see sort of sustained attention to this space, and frankly, that's the ability for it to scale. So I think it's that shift from risk mitigation to value creation, and thinking about it from that shared value lens.
Yeah, and maybe I'll just add as well that we're seeing a lot of organizations do the value creation, but actually build digital upskilling and ESG in a very deliberate way, because a lot of the way in which information is being used, it's an important part of sustainability, is really understanding that, it can't be sitting in Excel sheets. It actually needs to have a data platform. You need to have innovation about how data moves in the organization. You need to be using it to predict and be proactive and thinking about real time and smarter ways of doing things. So ESG, embedding it into data platform, but also a lot of education and some decentralization. So what we are seeing is corporate objectives and initiatives and targets being set at an enterprise level, but within the different lines of service and business lines, giving a certain amount of autonomy to new innovation, new products, new services, depending on the geographies that companies are interacting with, the customers, the way they touch the supply chain, and really making sure that that innovation is supported by very interesting financial mechanisms within the company, whether it's compensation, but also we have now these sort of sustainability funds and bonds and all kinds of financial mechanisms to really spur innovation. So I think from a company structure perspective, yes, there's strategies and policies and process, but there's also this really important decentralization to empower teams to be successful.
Now, we're going to wrap up soon, but before we do, I want to give you the chance to call someone out, and I really hope you do. And someone could be a person, it could be an organization, but if you had 30 seconds to pitch someone, anyone, or a group that you think has the power to move the needle on any one of these topics that we discussed today, and hopefully the one that you're most passionate about, who would you pitch? And what would you urge that person or that group to do now? And please don't be shy. Let's go hard.
I will kick off. I think often when we have these discussions, we focus on the largest, in this case, Canadian corporations or the largest international organizations. But I think that there is an important role that small and medium-sized enterprises play in this. And, we've done a great job of making this extremely complex and frankly overwhelming for those organizations. But there is a way to simplify this. Not worrying about, necessarily the taxonomies and all of the complications that we as international organizations are dealing with. But again, through that lens of materiality, figuring out what, and shared value, thinking about how can your business, no matter how big or small, drive, change in, one or two key areas of which, we as a country and a globe need to address. So often, I think the call out is for small and medium-sized organizations that they can and should have a role to play in this, and not to be, overwhelmed by the complexity that we've been discussing here.
Good, I like it. Who's next?
I can go next, and just to go on the same themes that I've been talking about education. I'm not saying that maybe it's not done, but I have more standardized way to have a clear what it is to be an ESG, like have a certificate, but also, as we talked about, having embedded everywhere to make it a little bit embedded in the education program, and that could start even before university. So I would really love to see if we truly as a country want to move towards this way, and we have targets to start early to educate what it is, what it means, and see how it can be embedded on our everyday lives. Because I don't think it's only on businesses, it's us as human to be able to have this across. It starts with education. So I would go with education.
Well, sorry, did you want to go, Priti?
Yeah, I could go. So there's a couple of things that I want to call out, based on Sarah's comments as well, that, the larger organizations obviously have paid attention to this. They have been under scrutiny, they have the resources. So, there's a lot that's already been done, and, smaller enterprises are kind of struggling with what ESG is. The biggest challenge to ESG I see right now is really this fundamentalism on both sides. It's becoming a topic of, a little bit of a conflict, I would say, between the left and the right. And I think we really need to stay away from that, because this is really about value creation. And when organizations are thinking about ESG, it's really about their own purpose, their strategy. How are they positioned in society to create that value, that Janice has talked about? So I think, you might come across certain discourses about ESG that are very divisive, but ultimately it's really about being ethical, being thoughtful, and having common sense. So that would be my takeaway. If I was to pick an organization or a person, I would pick Catalyst. It's a global organization working on D&I. And, that's one organization I can totally stand behind the kind of work they've done in terms of educating, making sure, those issues are brought to front, unconscious bias, some of the things that have really moved the needle in the corporate sector. So that would be one organization I'd give a shout out to.
Thank you. And Janice, please wrap us up.
Well, it's a tough question, but hard to pick one. So I think what I'd like to do is go back to the government of Canada. I think we live in a wonderful country, and I'd really like to, sort of a little bit of a nudge to the important work that's already underway and ongoing. But specifically, I think we should accelerate the quality of life framework. I think there's a lot of work to be done with regards to how we measure economic prosperity, social equality, marginalized communities, and what we're doing from an ecosystem perspective. A lot of that work is already underway, and I think companies, organizations will benefit from KPIs and metrics that they can really rally around, and especially around sustainable finance, to determine, are we actually moving the needle? What do we want to look like as an economy, moving away from these sort of qualitative, ambitious expectations to something that's truly quantifiable? So, it's a nudge, and at the same time, it's a nod to the government of Canada for the extensive work that's gone on. But I just don't think enough people know about the sort of quality of life frameworks and opportunities that exist.
Excellent. Well, that brings our session to a close. I want to thank Priti, Janice, Cyrielle, Sarah. Thank you so much for your time and the great insights you put forward today. To the audience, do go to futures.era.ca to stay informed of the Industry Futures series. And please go to TheFutureEconomy.ca, sign up for our newsletter, follow us on the socials, and you'll get the latest interviews about thought leaders changing the future of our economy. I want to say thank you to Priti, Janice, Cyrielle, and Sarah for their time and their amazing insights today. Do go to the Industry Futures website, which is futures.era.ca, to stay in touch and keep abreast of the series. And go to TheFutureEconomy.ca to sign up for our newsletter and follow us on socials for our next interviews with amazing Canadian thought leaders. I'm Tim Penketh, founder and CEO of TheFutureEconomy.ca. I want to thank you, my guests. I want to thank ERA for putting this opportunity forward, and I want to thank you today for watching. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.